The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, it's the row that's been engulfing the Labour Party for month after month that even led to the resignation from the parliamentary party of senior MP Frank Field last week. Yup, it's the anti-Semitism row, and today Labour's National Executive Committee have met with an attempt to try and put a lid on all of this. Now, we understand that they have adopted all 11 of the recommendations from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. But let's find out a little bit more. Let me go to LBC's reporter Matthew Thompson, who's on top of this story. Matthew, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Well, yes, you say they've attempted to put a lid on all of this. The question remains whether that lid will now stay on. They have adopted, as you say, the full International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of what constitutes anti-Semitism after an afternoon of what we understand were sometimes fractious deliberations, let's say. But crucially, they've published it alongside, and I quote, a statement which ensures this will not in any way undermine freedom of expression on Israel or the rights of Palestinians. Now, that statement itself exists. We haven't got it yet. It hasn't been published. But it is in some ways a sop to those who stood outside the Labour Party headquarters today, for people like Jewish Voice for Labour and some Momentum activists who wanted this IHRA definition scrapped or not implemented in full. The real proof in the pudding will be what that looks like and what effect that has on the IHRA definitions. It will be scrutinised by political hacks, by members of the Jewish community for anything that suggests it might be watering down that definition or changing it in any way. It's had a cautious welcome, Nigel, I would have thought, from Jewish groups. The Board of Deputies, for example, just released a statement. They have described it as very long overdue, but they have said it's the right call. But they also say, and this is the key point, I think, Nigel, we need to see firm action taken against anti-Semites, but Labour must resolve the outstanding cases and introduce greater transparency to the disciplinary process. And I think that's where the next attention will turn.
Yeah, so it's one thing. Yeah, there's one thing to say, OK, we're adopting this definition, but as I understand it, there are a large number of outstanding disciplinary cases of people accused of anti-Semitism. So what you're saying really is the proof is in the pudding, yeah? Exactly.
How will this now affect the Labour Party's disciplinary processes, and will we start to see them taking firm action against anti-Semites? And that's sort of where I envision the next stage of this row will go to, if you like, Nigel.
Yeah. Matthew, thanks very much indeed. Well, that's what we know. There is some more detail to come out, but Labour's National Executive have adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definitions on anti-Semitism. You may say, gosh, hasn't it taken a long time? Let me ask you, will this solve Labour's problems on this issue? If you think, well, actually, do you know what? By doing this, my faith is now restored in the Labour Party. That's how you feel, call me on 0345 6060 973. Maybe you think too much damage has been done, in which case text to 84850. And maybe you think, actually, do you know what? It isn't just anti-Semitism. It's all the other stuff. It's the mixing with people directly linked to terrorist groups. It's that photograph in that Palestinian martyr ceremony with people directly involved in that appalling massacre back in 1972 of Jewish athletes at the Olympics. If you, like me, think that actually this is too little, too late, too much damage has been done, there's too much of a taint, and anyway, his associations with so many of these people mean this row will never go away, then of course you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course you can watch us on Facebook, comment there too. I'm broadcasting from Auckland in New Zealand this morning. Let us go straight to Callum in Belfast, a new caller to this show. Callum, are Labour's problems with anti-Semitism now firmly behind them?
Not at all, Nigel. Great to speak to you. I don't think this is. I think this is a U-turn for a lot of core supporters in the Labour Party. Now, I'm based in, you're calling me, mentioned Belfast, so we don't have the ability to vote for Labour over here. I'm not a Labour supporter, but I'm a Jeremy Corbyn supporter, and I'm a Palestinian rights supporter. And I think the argument around this has been turned into anti-Semitism, whenever this is really an issue about being able to question Israel's policy openly regarding the Palestinians and it's been flipped on its head to become an anti-Semitism now. I think Jeremy Corbyn will lose support.
Callum, I understand that. And you're quite right. People should be able to criticise the actions of Israel without that necessarily being seen as anti-Semitism. I understand that. But has it been wise, Callum, in your view, and particularly given your sentiments towards the rights of Palestinians, has it been right of Jeremy Corbyn to mix with people, to be photographed with people, to share platforms with people directly involved in terrorist movements?
I'm glad you mentioned that, Nigel. I'm very glad you mentioned that, because being from the community and background that I'm from, a lot of the beliefs that I would have, your listeners right now would deem as terroristic. I'm an Irish nationalist. I believe in Ireland becoming a united Ireland. I believe Brexit, by the way, is going to help us in our process much further. But when you look
hang on, Callum. You can be an Irish nationalist. You can believe that Northern Ireland should leave the United Kingdom and become part of the Republic. You can do that without wanting to support violent means, can't you?
No, without doubt. And what's a common factor here, and what I've known from my end, being an Irishman, is the British force, and I understand from this, and it's the same with the Palestinians. What a terrorist attack is never correct. What the IRA carried out was never. I'm never going to wish any happiness for it. But the fact of the matter is that if you don't sit down in a room with people who you don't agree with, like we are where we are in my country now, where I go to school. Well, I don't go to school, actually, I'm a worker there. But my nieces and nephews go to school, and they don't deal with inciting and upbringing like I did when I was a child, only because people came to the table. Jeremy Corbyn was the first people.
I'm all for that, Callum. But Callum, Jeremy Corbyn has never spoken to the other side, point one. And point two, I repeat the point, I think he spent too much time with bad people. Callum, I get the passion, I understand it. Let's move on to David in St John's Wood. David, good evening. Are Jeremy Corbyn's problems over anti-Semitism now behind him?
No, never then. They'll never be behind him because he supports Palestine, and good luck to him. And I think it's a shame, though, that he once again didn't have the backbone to actually not take on the 11 points and to say, no, we're sticking up for freedom of speech, because that is far more important. I mean, for the other day, let's think about it. The other day, we had the head of the Jewish religion, Lord Sachs, saying that Corbyn was anti-Semitic because Corbyn had said that that Zionists who hadn't been in this country so long didn't get British irony. Now,
irony, yeah.
Nothing whatsoever anti-Semitic about that, and yet Sachs said it was the worst thing since the Rivers of Blood speech. Now, isn't it ironic that when you think about it, only a week ago, the leader of Israel, Netanyahu, said the weak would be crushed and put into history, clearly referencing the Palestinians. Now, if Corbyn was to say that Netanyahu was saying something like Hitler, he would absolutely be called an anti-Semite. But of course, it's not anti-Semitic to say that, because it's true to say that Netanyahu was speaking something that Hitler could clearly have said to the Jews, something very similar, and did say something very similar in the Second World War.
I think that Netanyahu would take a grave exception to that example. But David, do you understand the point that I'm making? That even if, from Labour's perspective, they've adopted, all of these clauses, it's the people that Corbyn has met with that will taint him in the future.
Well, it would certainly taint him with every single Israel supporter. Yes, of course, because he supports Palestine. But he should stand up and say that. But anyone who...
Well, I'm all for... Look, I've got no problem in people supporting Palestine. I've got no problem, as with our previous caller, Callum, in people supporting, Irish nationalism. But you do not have to pander to violent terrorist groups to do that. David, I thank you. I'm going to crack on and go to New York City, speak to a new caller to this show, Daniel. Good... What'll it be? Afternoon over there, Daniel, won't it?
Well, I'm actually in Tel Aviv in Israel. I'm British. I'm born and raised in Leeds. I'm calling from Skype, so it's a New York line, so sorry for deceiving you.
Okay, right, okay. So you're actually in Tel Aviv. Okay, Daniel. Okay, now, the Labour Party have, and it may have taken some time, but they have adopted these definitions. Surely that's the end of the matter, isn't it?
Well, we'd like to think so, but unfortunately... this gentleman, Mr. Corbyn, is a habitual line stepper. He's a troublemaker. He's really had no option but to accept the definition of anti-Semitism, the global recognition of it. I mean, other entities like the CPS have done so. So he had no choice. He was in a real sticky situation. But that really doesn't undo the problems and issues he's caused, and the great offence he's caused to the British Jewish community and the wider Jewish community. And this has really your callers called repeatedly about Israel and the Palestinians. This should really have nothing to do with it. He never talks about the Jordanians' oppression of Palestinians, or the Egyptians rejecting the Gazans, or the Syrians' behaviour towards the Palestinians. This guy has a problem with Jews, and it stinks.
Well, I mean, what of all the things that he's said and done, what stands out for you as being the worst, Daniel?
I'll tell you what stands out as being the worst. You are judged by your peers. Birds of a feather flock together. All of his cronies around him have been involved with anti-Semitic slurs. I don't have to mention them all to you. We've been seeing them week after week. It's happened in part.
Well,
sorry, go on.
I have to say, no, Daniel, I have to say, I think some of the people he's chosen to mix with, damn him. And it's not just the odd meeting that's happened when perhaps he's been conned into meeting the wrong person. That can happen to anyone in politics. But again and again and again, he shared platforms with people directly linked to these terrorist groups. Daniel, I thank you very much for your call from Tel Aviv. Well, passion's still strong on both sides of the argument. Momentum there, lobbying outside of that NEC meeting, trying to get Labour not to adopt these definitions. They have been, but I do rather agree with Matthew Thompson's LBC's reporter, who said earlier, whatever they've adopted, what are they going to do about the outstanding disciplinary cases? What will they do about people, Labour supporters, who've said some pretty awful things? Will they show they haven't just adopted these definitions, but they actually mean it, and they want to drive anti-Semitism out of the Labour Party? That we'll see over the next few weeks. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's now 6:15. Well, after months of wrangling, Labour's National Executive Committee have decided today to adopt the IHRA definition, the internationally accepted definition on anti-Semitism. For months, many in Labour didn't want to do it. They have. Does that now mean Corbyn's problems are behind him? Before I get back to that, a story here that I feel strongly about. Some people may remember the debate I did, sponsored by LBC, against Nick Clegg when he was Deputy Prime Minister back in 2014. And I said one of the reasons I wanted to leave the European Union is I did not want us to become part of a European army. Clegg said to me that was all a dangerous fantasy. Well, try this for size. The 3rd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, have arrived today in Bosnia-Herzegovina as part of an EUFOR training exercise. And on their arms, they have put on European Union flags. That's right, the Parachute Regiment are wearing the flag of the European Union for this training exercise that they are on. As you can imagine, I strongly disapprove of this. I disapprove of the European Army. I think we should put more faith in NATO. And it's led to an intervention from UKIP leader Gerard Batten, who has said Brits should boycott the armed forces because our military is now dominated by the EU. He said our soldiers are no longer fighting for Queen and for country, but our military is serving under the flag of a foreign power. And I think that row will go on over the course of the next few days. Back to Mr. Corbyn, and your message is flooding in. Hang on, how can you fight against the definition for so long and then turn around and say the definition is now okay? What's changed? People will see through this. Evening, Nigel. Whatever has been agreed today by Labour will not change the views of those who are anti-Semitic. In my view, it will change nothing, and the problems that Labour have will not change. That's what Ron from Walderslade in Kent reckons. And your Facebook messages coming in. Rick says nothing can solve Labour's problems. Dirk says, so not full acceptance, but instead qualified acceptance. Well, Dirk, As we understand it at the moment, they have accepted all 11 definitions, but they've written in their own clause which says you're okay to criticise Israel. I think, if I'm trying to be objective about this, honestly, you should be able to criticise Israel without that necessarily being anti-Semitic. Rob says, so Labour have adopted the Jewish statement in full, but allows freedom of speech. So nothing really changes, just smoke and mirrors. Quite a lot of scepticism about this. I have to say, I don't think this solves Labour's problem on this issue whatsoever. It is too little, it is too late, and he will continue, in my opinion, to be judged by those Palestinian terrorist groups that he has been much, much too close to. That's my view. What does Jake in Leeds make of all of this? Good evening, Jake.
Hello, Nigel. How are you?
I am well. So,
Good.
Is this a good day for Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, I don't think it's going to get any better, to be honest. I mean, I think that the adoption of this definition is purely a political move to stop the huge outcry which is facing the Labour Party at the moment. But I think it is a move to just stop that. He can't really erase the past that he has, and I think that is a bigger issue than this definition. The history of this, with all these different small cases of perhaps not anti-Semitism, but like you said before, hanging out with dodgy people laying a wreath. You don't have to lay a wreath to look slightly dodgy. And my biggest problem with this is the hypocrisy which is coming from not all, but some Labour members, people on the left, in relation to excusing Corbyn for appearing on platforms with these extreme people. I remember the days when you yourself, Nigel, were held responsible for what some nutters on Twitter were saying in UKIP. You were held responsible for that. So why is Jeremy Corbyn excused by the same people who backed you for being involved with those people?
Yeah, no, Jake, I had years of this. I mean, I had years and years of our opponents in politics and in the media, and those who were firmly on the side of staying in the European Union, doing all their best to conflate any argument that I made about controlling our borders with racism. And yes, if somebody I'd never met, living in some part of the UK I'd never been to, at 2 o'clock in the morning, downwind of too many drinks, said something outrageous on Twitter, somehow I was responsible for it. And I do agree, Jake, Jeremy Corbyn is not being held to the same standards. Would you, Jake, agree with me that perhaps the low point in all of this was that when Corbyn talked about British Zionists, some who've even been born here who don't get British irony, that was a real us and them moment, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, the difficulty with that is, of course, the fact that he said Zionists instead of Jews, and they are very closely related. But I agree with a lot of previous callers that criticising Zionists and criticising...
Jake, we're losing you. We love having you on the line. We've had you before. That line's rotten. Let's go to a brand new caller, John, who's living in Brighton. Good evening, John.
Good evening, Nigel. Where do I start?
Well, I don't know. You tell me. I mean, I tell you what. Start by answering this. Does this adoption today by Labour's NEC, does it help to ease the anti-Semitism row that's been around the Labour Party now for months?
Of course it doesn't. I mean, reputations stick. I'm no politician, Nigel, but I'm telling you, if I did something that Corbyn has done in the past and all his cronies have done in the past, and then I turned up about 10 years later going, oh yeah, I'm the greatest gift. Believe you me, people would find out about me quicker than lightning. It doesn't... I'm sorry, Nigel, but Corbyn has got a past that's longer than the flaming English Channel and the Atlantic Ocean put together. I mean, the quicker we...
Yeah, you're right. But John, you say the quicker we get rid of him, but he's not going to be gotten rid of, is he? Because all those £3 members that Ed Miliband got into the party, they just excuse him whatever he seems to say or do.
Yeah, I know. And the thing is, if they think they're going to win an election by these wallies and wussies that he's got there, then they can think again, because they won't. And unfortunately...
No, all right, so John, in your view, too much damage done already. This doesn't change anything, yeah?
Well, you've got it in one. I mean, you've only got to look at his past. I mean, I'm sorry, but past reputations will stick.
Absolutely, John. Thank you for your call. Thanks for your comment. Nigel, too little, too late, says Solomon from Jerusalem. How nasty, this is aimed at me, by the way, you're still persecuting Corbyn. Well, I'm not persecuting him. I'm just pointing out. I mean, can you imagine? You know, when I was running for the European elections, the general election, the referendum, can you imagine if a whole series of photographs came out with me mixing with people who'd been directly involved in terrorism? I mean, I wouldn't have been given a platform. This guy has got away with way too much, in my view. David from Hereford says, could it be that Labour have adopted the international resolution more out of political expediency than genuine conviction? David Edwards, that may well be the case. You must decide. You must let me know what you think. But I have to say I view this all pretty cynically. If they felt that strongly about it, they could have done this a long time ago. Stephen is calling from Putney. Good evening, Stephen.
Good evening, Nigel. Yes, the NEC have now reluctantly accepted the international definition of anti-Semitism together with all the examples. Of course, one of the examples states that it is illegitimate to compare the Israeli state with the Nazis. Should not Mr. Corbyn therefore refer himself to the Labour Party's disciplinary panel? Because, of course, he hosted a meeting which was called From Auschwitz to Gaza.
Yeah, I know, and we had a caller earlier on this evening, Stephen, you know, sort of comparing Netanyahu's comments to Hitler's comments. Frankly, my view is that to compare anyone or anything to Hitler or the Nazis is the wrong thing to do. It's a bad place to be. But yes, no, you're absolutely right. And Stephen, every week that goes by, we seem to find out another committee room somewhere in the Palace of Westminster, you know, where Corbyn sat, at meetings under inappropriate titles with some very, very bad people. Stephen, tell me, have you been a Labour supporter at any point over the years?
I have been a Labour supporter, but there is a fundamental point, and I just wonder why it's not really discussed anymore, and that is why the Momentum group around Corbyn have been so reluctant to accept the examples. And I think it's because they actually don't think that those things are anti-Semitic. For example, they don't think that it's illegitimate to call the Israeli state a racist endeavour, not just because they disapprove of Netanyahu's policies or the settlements in the West Bank. They actually think that Israel itself should never have been founded. When they think of ending the occupation, they don't really mean end Israeli settlements. They actually think of Israel itself as an occupation of Palestinian land.
There are many that do think that. Absolutely. Thank you for your call. On Twitter I get, this changes absolutely diddly squat. That term that Boris used the other day, I suspect we'll hear it more and more. The anti-Semitism of Labour Party will just carry on and, in fact, get steadily worse. That is the view of Mark. If we aren't allowed to criticise Israel, what next? From Ben in Guildford. Ben, I've never ever tried to stop people speaking freely and speaking their minds. They should be able to, and I made it clear tonight. You should be able to criticise Israel without that being anti-Semitism of itself. Of course, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive on LBC. It is now 6:30. I'm asking you, does Labour's NEC adopting the internationally accepted definition of anti-Semitism, does it end Labour's problems on this issue? So far, not many of you think it does, but if you're one of those people who thinks, do you know what, they're going to put it all behind them now and march on to victory, call me on 0345 6060 973. But before that, the Brexit Secretary, Dominic Raab, has been up today in the House of Commons telling us that the vast majority of the UK's deal with Europe has been agreed. Let's listen to him.
Our approach acknowledges that there are some risks to a no-deal scenario and demonstrates that we are taking the action to avoid, to minimise and to mitigate these potential risks so we are equipped to manage any short-term disruption. And while it's not what we want, a no-deal scenario would bring some countervailing opportunities. We would be able to lower tariffs and negotiate and bring into effect new free trade deals straight away. There would be the immediate recovery of full legislative and regulatory control, including over immigration policy, and whilst mindful of our legal obligations, a swifter end to our financial contributions to the EU. So, Mr. Speaker, I will continue to meet regularly with Michel Barnier, confident that a deal is within our grasp, and if the ambition and pragmatism that we have shown is matched by our EU friends. But this House and the British people can rest assured that the UK will be ready for Brexit, deal or no deal, and prepared, whatever the outcome, so that this country goes from strength to strength, and I commend this statement to the House.
Well, there you are. There's Dominic Raab, the Brexit Secretary, giving us the Noel Edmonds deal or no deal. We're ready. It won't be a problem. Is he right? Or was Boris right when he wrote in the Telegraph yesterday that actually this is like a wrestling match, a pre-arranged giant haystacks, big daddy wrestling match where the result actually has been sorted out already, and Boris thinks, yeah, there's going to be a deal, but one that leaves us with Brexit in name only. You pays your money, you takes your choice. Back to the Labour Party, back to their NEC adopting this international definition on anti-Semitism. Does it end Labour's problems? I think it's too little too late, and I think his association with so many people directly linked to terrorism, for me, that damns him. But hey, tell me I'm wrong. Rita is calling from Bexley, and she's a new caller to this show. Good evening, Rita.
Hello? Nigel, what else could you possibly say? Because politically, you could not be further away from Jeremy Corbyn. And if you if you don't mind me saying about the double standards and the hypocrisy, what Boris Johnson has stirred up, I think some of your callers and some of the really rabid media coverage, it is no better than incitement to hatred against Jeremy. It is vicious and malignant and foul, extremely. It gives me the creeps. I know.
Well, Rita, you mentioned Boris Johnson, okay? You mentioned Boris Johnson, and clearly you're talking about his comments about Muslim women wearing the burqa, looking like letterboxes, okay? And I understand that. But what I haven't seen any photographs of Boris Johnson sitting on platforms with people whose aim and intention is to go out and kill Muslim people. I've not seen a single photograph of Boris Johnson doing that, but I've seen plenty of photographs of Jeremy Corbyn attending meetings with groups, terrorist groups, that have committed atrocities. Wouldn't you agree, Rita? There's a very big difference there.
No, because the whole thing, you know what Callum said? This has all been turned on its head. The billions and billions of military funding that Israel gets, that is ignored. Lethal force. In 1948, I heard on BBC, Radio 4, that 750 plus Palestinians were driven out of their homes and out of their lands in 1948, and it has continued. Now, if we're talking about equality, justice, social justice, that we cannot ignore or stay silent, and that's all Jeremy as a backbencher did. I find Jeremy a very dignified, well-controlled and quietly spoken person. He's human. No one's perfect, but I would give him a chance to lead this country, because we can't do any worse than we've been doing.
Rita, you use the word dignified, okay? I'm going to ask you, do you think it was dignified for Jeremy Corbyn to go to that Palestinian martyrs ceremony, to stand there with people directly involved with terrorist groups, one particular person involved with a group that even murdered a British rabbi, and to be there and to lay wreaths on the graves of people who'd committed those barbaric atrocities in Munich in 1972? Do you think that's dignified, Rita?
Nigel, may I just ask you, what about...
No, you may not. I asked you, do you think that's dignified?
I think that can also be classified as a misrepresentation, because he has... No. Come on, Rita. It's not misrepresentation. It's perfectly clear. He knew where he was. He knew why he was there and who he was with. That's not dignified. It's disgraceful. Nigel, may I say, we sell arms to some of the worst brutal regimes in the world, do we not? We manufacture and profit from that.
Rita, I'm not pretending on this phone call we can solve all of the world's problems, and there are many things that we do and have done in history over which we could be accused of hypocrisy, misjudgment, and many other things. Two wrongs certainly don't make a right. Rita, you support the guy. There's nothing I'm going to say is going to convince you, but Rita, I think you're in very much the minority on this. But I thank you for your call and your passion. Let's go to Jack in Sheffield, another new caller to the show. Jack, good evening.
Hello, Nigel, and everybody listening. Hi.
Hi. Well, Jack, so tell me, is this a good day for Corbyn, Jack? Tell me.
No, not really. In my opinion, in regards to Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, I think they are going downhill faster and faster with how it keeps going with these new stories. I live in Sheffield now, but I'm also from the Barnsley, Rotherham, Doncaster area, which is all Labour supporting, really.
Labour. Funny actually, Jack. Labour supporting and Brexit supporting, but we'll debate that one another evening.
Yeah, and this is where everything's going to kind of get changed up soon in my eyes. I feel like if Labour doesn't do something big to show that they're against this kind of discrimination and all this kind of thing, they're going to lose big style. And
so what you're saying, Jack, to me is that today's adoption by Labour's NEC of this international definition on anti-Semitism, what you're saying to me is this is just not enough, is it?
Yeah, that's too late, really. They could have done that straight away. In terms of this definition, one of the sticking points is about criticising Israel. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
How I can understand this argument, right? And it's not the point of because people like to say Israel can't exist. That's the bad. Israel can exist. You could argue about where its borders are, what it does, its policies, all these kind of things. But to say that the Jewish people don't deserve a home and something like that, then that's where
and there are many people on the other side of the argument, Jack, that do say that. There are some even that want it completely destroyed, and one senses when you hear some of those things, the people within it too. Jack, I thank you very much indeed. On Twitter I get, unfortunately for this country, Corbyn has pushed the Labour Party so far to the left that everybody now in the centre of politics is portrayed as racist. Pete, I agree with that, because there are so many now. In fact, we had protesters outside my meeting here in New Zealand last night. There are so many now taking this kind of Trotskyist worldview that we're all global citizens, there shouldn't even be borders of any kind, that to even say you should control immigration, you are a racist. Yet the centre is now being seen as being very, very right. No, they have gone too far to get out of this now, to the point that it does not matter what they adopt, says William. William, almost you're saying they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. It doesn't really matter anymore. Jay in East London says, Nigel, why don't Jeremy Corbyn and Labour just concentrate on Britain? What the hell is going on in this country? Well, Jay, I think the argument, the Palestine-Israel argument, is actually a fundamentally important one. Nigel, the truth is that the left are anti-Semitic and are increasingly so as they align with the Muslim communities. Strong stuff. It won't change their actual opinions. This discussion is pointless, says Steve. Well, Steve, pointless or not, we are having it. And Steve says there that actually Labour is very close to the Muslim community, and that has pushed them in a more anti-Semitic direction. It's a point of view that if anybody in public life made it, they would be shouted down. Interesting to get your views on that point. Anyway, I think so far, those of you that have called up to defend Jeremy Corbyn, and we had Rita on the phone not long ago, frankly, I think a lot of you have lost your marbles. How can it be right for a potential Prime Minister of this country to appear on platforms with people linked with terrorist groups? Not to have done it once, but to have done it over and over. That, to me, is what damns Corbyn with this whole anti-Semitism row, and it's irrelevant, frankly, whether the NEC have adopted this definition or not. That's my view. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive on OBC. It's now 6:45. Are Corbyn's problems with anti-Semitism over as the NEC adopts the internationally recognised definition on anti-Semitism? I don't think so. Some of you think he's done nothing wrong. But before that, remember last week we debated scallop wars, the battles going on between British and French fishermen. And I said to you, we will be hearing a lot more about fishing as this whole Brexit debate unwinds. Well, today it's bluefin tuna. Yeah, now, I know many of you probably think, oh, well, bluefin tuna, they're not in British waters. Do you know, in the 1930s, 40s and 50s, there were so many bluefin tuna in British waters, there was actually a British tuna club based up in Scarborough and Whitby, and people would go out with rod and line and catch them. When I say catch them up to 830 pounds in weight. Over the last couple of years, the bluefin tuna have made a big comeback in the southwestern approaches. Indeed, my brother was out fishing off Cornwall last week and saw huge shoals of bluefin tuna. Well, a couple of French fishermen who were pair trawling for bass and bream near the Channel Islands caught 44 big bluefin tuna the other day. Now, they weren't allowed under EU quotas to keep much of it for profit, but it shows the potential of what's there in our waters. British fishermen not happy about this because even though the bluefin tuna are back, and yeah, if we're going to start catching them commercially, we should do so on a sensible level. The bluefin tuna are back in British waters, and we are not allowed, the British fishing fleet, despite the fact they're there in our waters, we're not allowed to catch a single one because Brussels haven't given us a quota. And worse than that, our anglers are not even allowed to go out and target them. I can just see the thought of tuna in the West Country, hundreds, thousands of people going down to try and catch one on a rod and line, spending lots of money in Devon and Cornwall, but because we're part of the EU, we can't do it. You'll hear a lot more about fishing as Brexit unwinds. Back to Mr. Corbyn. Paul on Facebook says, Corbyn is too explosive a character to be leader of a party. Gina says, Corbyn would sink us. Good and proper. And Brian is becoming really disappointed with the whole political class. He says, I'm ashamed of the politicians in this country, from Labour with anti-Semitism to the treacherous Tory PM and her Remainer ilk trying to keep us tied to the EU. Brian, I can't ever think in my lifetime of a moment when both of our major parties were so torn with division as we've got today. Let's go to Hackney. Let's speak to George, a new caller to this show. George, good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Nigel. Finally got to speak to you. I think you don't really understand what Corbyn's about. In the end, as any good statesman knows, if you wish to bring about peace, you have to speak to both sides, and that's what Corbyn has always done. He spoke to both sides.
Really? George, what is the evidence? George, hang on. What is the evidence of Corbyn speaking to the other side? What is the evidence of Corbyn speaking to the Israelis or the Jewish community about these issues?
You got to remember that presently the Jewish community is represented on television by the Jewish Council and others. They don't represent all the Jewish communities. I've got Jewish ancestry, I've got Jewish DNA, I've got a Jewish surname, I look Jewish. Jewish Voices of Labour also represent the Jewish community within the Labour Party, and they don't think they're being Labour Party's being anti-Semitic. I'll tell you where I have experienced that.
No, George, I do accept that nobody has got a monopoly on representing the Jewish community. I completely understand that. But I repeat my question to you. You said statesman, and you were using that word in the context of Jeremy Corbyn. Statesman, will talk to groups on both sides of an argument. But where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? Jeremy Corbyn repeatedly has appeared on platforms with pro-Palestinians, some of whom have advocated terrorism. Where is the evidence for him talking to the Israeli groups or the other side? Because I haven't seen it, George.
Well, it exists. If you,
what if it does? What if it does, George? Yeah, go on.
Go to. I've been on platforms and I've seen him talk about peace, international. I've seen him talk about Middle East. I've seen him talk about a lot of things. It is there.
George, you are failing. You are failing to convince me that there's any evidence that Jeremy Corbyn has tried genuinely to speak to both sides.
No, look, in the end you have to, and you're damning him for something.
No, I don't doubt that. George, I don't doubt that. I don't doubt the logic of the argument you're putting. All I'm saying to you is there's zero evidence of Corbyn being a statesman when it comes to this ongoing, it's been going on for a couple of thousand years, dispute. But there's no evidence that Corbyn is a statesman. There is no evidence he's even made any effort to speak to the other side.
Yes, it's clear. I mean, you've got two international...
No, George, it's not clear. Where's the evidence, George?
The evidence is that I can't tell you every meeting he's been to.
No, well, I tell you what, George, I've got a lot of... I mean, listen, I get it, you're a Corbyn supporter. I thank you for making your point. George, you've given me no evidence. Please, somebody, 0345 6060 973, someone tell me I'm wrong. Someone tell me that Jeremy Corbyn is a statesman. Show me the evidence that he spent as much time talking to Israeli groups as he has to a whole range of Palestinian groups, some of whom are outright terrorists. Let's go to Howard in Leeds, a new caller to this show. Howard, good evening.
Good evening. It's funny because that your last caller says that Jeremy Corbyn's done this, Jeremy Corbyn's done that, and as you say, rightly so, there's no evidence. The evidence is clear. For example, when Israel gave back the Gaza Strip was the most wonderful place. It was like the south of France, wonderful beaches, hotels, restaurants, and since Hamas, actually, it was the Palestinian authorities that took over, Yasser Arafat, and as soon as he took over, Hamas went to war with them. Over 2,000 Palestinians were killed. The leaders of Hamas live in Qatar in a $15 million palace. Okay, this is money that belongs to the Palestinian people. Okay, so Jeremy Corbyn's...
Let's just focus back in on Corbyn a bit if we can, Howard, because time is tight.
Well, Corbyn, he goes to different speeches and things all over Europe. He goes to Africa. He goes to South Africa, and he has never once, and this is for your last caller, sat down with Netanyahu, with Lieberman, with anybody. He hasn't.
I agree, Howard, I agree. I agree, and we keep getting people saying that there is evidence, it exists, we don't see it. Howard, I like that. Last caller is Alex in Wembley, another new caller to this show. Good evening, Alex.
Good evening, thank you very much. I'd like to make the point, and hopefully I can make the point properly, that it's not just the anti-Semitism in the hierarchy in the Labour Party. What people don't remember, and perhaps people over 50, 60, which I well am, they don't remember that he just doesn't go to funerals of Hamas and killers all over. When our boys were getting killed on the mainland in England during the IRA bombing here, where was Corbyn and where was John McDonnell? Attending IRA funerals. Why don't the people wise up? The normal English person that is born and bred like me in this country and my parents wise up to the fact that he is anti-British, not just anti-Semitic, he's anti-British. Will he bow before the Queen? No, he doesn't like the royal family. Why are people voting for him? Do they want this country to go down the drain completely?
Well, Howard, I have to say, I think his continual links with the IRA were an absolute, total disgrace, and I do agree with you. He's a Republican. You can. Tony Benn once said to me, he said, young man, he said, don't think because I'm a Republican that I'm not a patriot. And I stood really scolded by Tony Benn on that point. I've never forgotten it. You can, of course, be a Republican and be a patriot, but it does seem that Jeremy Corbyn has incredibly bad judgment in terms of those he wishes to mix with, and I certainly would not describe him as being pro-British. There we are. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'll be back tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick, but up next, it's Ian Dale.
Nigel, thank you very much indeed.